Well, thanks so much for having us here and sitting down to chat with us. Let's start with this. A lot of people across the Houston area had some sort of damage or impacts from the storm. CenterPoint not spared either. Tell me about your downtown building and where y'all are at in that process.
Yeah, and so want to just express our gratitude to our customers for their patience during the restoration. We know that in addition to all of the damage to people's homes and businesses, they were without power as well. So we, as you said, were impacted ourselves at our downtown headquarters. About 600 windows that were blown out or damaged. That damage has largely been restored with boarded up windows. So if you are downtown, you'll see that the streets around our building are still closed off, but the building has now been repaired. And our employees, about half of them will be back in the building as of next week, and then the remaining half kind of staggered throughout the month of July probably.
And this was not just your average afternoon thunderstorm to come rolling through. To have an impact like that, I mean, talk about the magnitude of this event that we went through.
So I equate it to a storm like Hurricane Ike coming from the north instead of the south. So it was winds equivalent to a strong Category 2 hurricane with no notice. During Hurricane Ike, there was some uncertainty along the way, but we had 12 days to prepare for it. This one we had essentially no notice, maybe about 15 minutes notice that there were strong storms coming through. So the same kind of damage that you saw for Hurricane Ike, you saw from the May 16th storm just coming from the other direction. Massive destruction in some pockets of town, not as widespread as a hurricane would be, but the same level of destruction in pockets to where it hit.
And you look at the destruction in those communities and, to downtown and Cypress and all these areas that were hit hard. In those areas is electrical infrastructure that took quite a hit. How can you help our viewers understand, how can you help the community understand how big of a dent this put in your infrastructure?
Sure. So I think people by now have seen pictures of the transmission towers that were significantly damaged in parts of the northern area near Bridgeland. I think people have seen entire trees falling over onto people's houses, falling onto people's cars, and also falling into our infrastructure, bringing that infrastructure down to the ground. So our infrastructure was impacted just as much as people's homes and businesses were by those large trees that had fallen over. So at the peak of the storm, we had about 922,000 customers out, again, with no notice. And it was because of all of that damage to our infrastructure, either caused by trees falling over, buildings blowing into it, the tornadic winds that took out some of the transmission towers. So yeah, significant damage, very similar, like I said, to a Category 2 hurricane.
And a lot of people that have lived in this area for quite some time, they look back at, Ike, they look back at Harvey, and, there were problems. Those were huge hurricanes. They wonder, how does something like this happen just during a one-off storm?
Right. So certainly these severe events are happening with more frequency and increasing severity when they do occur. It's one of the reasons why we filed a first of its kind resilience plan with the state earlier this year, where we are proposing to invest in infrastructure that can take those punches and get back up quicker. Because we know that those storms will happen. It's a question of when, not if. And we need to be able to meet the expectations of our customers and our communities to restore power as quickly as possible. There are different kinds of assets we can invest in to make that restoration quicker.
And you kind of talk about an investment there. With damage as widespread as this, do you have an idea? How much did this storm cost CenterPoint?
Sure. So we're still in restoration, which may be hard to believe given that the power is still on for every home and business that can take power at this point. But restoration will continue for a number of weeks and months. Some of the transmission infrastructure was replaced with temporary structures. They're still sturdy structures, but they need to be replaced with permanent infrastructure that will take months to do. There could also be distribution poles that are leaning, but power is flowing, right? But that infrastructure still needs to be fixed. So we don't have a final estimate yet, given that we are still in the restoration phase of this storm. It will be at least $100 million, is what our early estimates show. I don't have an upper end of that range yet, but as we complete restoration, we'll obviously have a better picture of that. And I know that affordability of these costs from restoration is going to be top of mind for our customers. It's top of mind for us. We have taken steps over the last decade to keep our rates relatively flat over that 10-year period. And we'll work, again, with our regulators and other stakeholders to affordably adjust rates to account for this storm damage.
Let me raise my next question.
Yep.
$100 million bill, that's quite the tab. Who's paying for that bill?
So our business operates on cost of service rates, right? So we collect the cost to serve our customers, no more, no less. That's what our regulators ensure every day. And so this cost of restoration is one of those costs of providing service to our customers. So regulators will review those costs and will allow rates to reflect those reasonable costs of restoration going forward. Very similar to what happened after Hurricane Ike. That was another storm that had fairly significant damage, fairly significant restoration costs. It was almost $700 million to restore service after Hurricane Ike. That went through a lengthy review process at the state level before any charges were passed on to customers. And that storm impacted customer bills by about $1.50 a month. That charge is no longer being charged to customers, obviously. It's been a little while ago, but we will go through a very similar process for review of these costs before they're passed along to any customer.
So CenterPoint will go to the commission, right, and request for some sort of charge to eventually be applied and has to be approved?
That's right. That's right. So there will be a public process where all stakeholders can take a look at the reasonableness of those charges before any of those charges hit customer bills. And at the same time, we are working to continue to have our charges be under the rate of historic inflation. Like I mentioned, we've worked to keep them relatively flat over the last 10 years, and we'll continue to work at keeping rates affordable for customers, even including these restoration costs.
And some people, they have no idea that the Public Utilities Commission exists and what the PUC does and how that all works. I guess dumbing it down, to the baseline, customers will end up paying for that tab.
That's right. Those costs, after being reviewed for reasonableness, will be charged to the customers that we have the privilege to serve. Important to note that damage to transmission lines will be treated a little bit differently. The bulk power system that is the transmission grid is paid for by all Texans that use that grid. So Houstonians pay about 25% of the transmission costs for the state. So the dollars that we spend to restore the transmission towers, for example, will not be borne 100% by Houston area customers. Houston area customers will pay about 25% of that cost.
So one of our viewers, our KPRC chief viewer, Ranger 1994, he asked this question. He said, CenterPoint should have a fund for such damage without increasing rates. What can CenterPoint do to keep rates down?
Fair question. So there are a couple ways that rates could be set. You could set rates that way. That's not how the state has chosen to set rates for utilities like us. Instead, they've chosen to review storm costs if and when they occur, and only after assessing the reasonableness of those charges do they pass them on to customers, as opposed to creating a fund that customers pay for no matter whether there's damage or no matter when there's damage, and pre-funding it. So I'm not saying that one way is right or wrong, but if our customers had pre-funded the cost of this storm over the last, say, decade, and those customers may have moved away, you are having different people pay for it if you pay for it in advance of a storm. Fortunately, we don't have these major events that often. And so I do think that it's reasonable to do this review after the fact before anything hits a customer's bill versus creating a fund that customers will pay for in advance. At the end of the day, either process could work.
And I want to be very clear, I think some people might not even know what CenterPoint does. Some people might have CenterPoint for their gas bill. I have a different electric provider, and some people have no idea. So let me ask you this. What does CenterPoint do in terms of getting power to my house?
So CenterPoint is the infrastructure provider. We own and operate the poles, the wires, the substations, the meter, all of the stationary equipment to deliver energy to your home or business. We don't generate the electrons, and we don't send you a bill for the service that you're receiving from your retail electric provider. We are that infrastructure provider to get the power from the generators to you on behalf of those retail providers.
Infrastructure, that's my next point. And our viewer, KPRC2 viewer, Dickie, has this question as well. It's almost the same question that I have. They say, I know CenterPoint can't control the weather, but what proactive steps are being taken to at least attempt to try to minimize power outages and the time it takes to restore power?
Sure. Great question. And the reason why we filed a first of its kind resilience plan earlier this year with the State Public Utility Commission, because we do know that we can make investments today that will allow us to take these punches that are coming with more frequency and more severity and get back up quicker, right? And so that is my definition of resilience, taking a punch and getting back up quicker. We will, as soon as that plan is approved, start making those investments and reporting to the PUC and to the public on our progress towards having that more resilient infrastructure in place.
I was shocked, I think, like many people were. Actually, Crooks and I were stuck in the traffic, our photojournalist Adrian Crooks. We were in the traffic on 290 where those towers came down, the lines came down across the road. I think that was an eye-opening moment for a lot of us, that this storm was that powerful and it resulted in that kind of damage. It begs the question, did this storm uncover any underlying issues with CenterPoint infrastructure? You look at hurricanes, and I can understand how that could bring down towers and cause catastrophic damage, but with a storm that, was localized in some areas, not in others, are there underlying issues with the infrastructure?
So I think it validated our proposal in our resilience plan to underground freeway crossings so that infrastructure is not above ground and not subject to being taken to the ground by tornadoes. It is very difficult to design infrastructure to survive a tornado. And so when you have a storm that includes that, what you have to do is mitigate against that risk, doing things like undergrounding freeway crossings so that transmission lines don't come down and block traffic and create their own public safety problem. So our resilience plan took those kinds of risks into account. The fact that this happened less than 2 months after filing that plan kind of validates that we were looking at the right risks to mitigate there. And that's why we look forward to moving forward with that plan once it's approved.
Was this an eye-opening experience for you in CenterPoint to see that this can happen on a random day of the week?
Yes, I think it's you can always learn from things that happen that you don't expect. And so we took it as a learning experience. We took it as an experience to be ready for hurricane season. We took it as an experience to learn, did we propose the right things in our resilience plan to take this punch and get back up quicker? We used some assets that we invested in post Winter Storm Uri from 3 Februaries ago, some of the emergency generation assets to power critical infrastructure, police stations, fire stations, senior living facilities, cooling centers, right? So we used it to validate, do we have the right kinds of assets there to get to a better bad outcome in these events, right? You always have outages during these events. You'll always have infrastructure that's impacted. Our resilience plan will get us to a better outcome to get back up powering our customers quicker. And this storm validated that we're addressing the right things in that plan.
Were any of those towers that, failed and came to the ground, were any of those at risk or in need of maintenance, or were they all up on their maintenance?
Yeah, I think it wasn't a structural problem with any of them. They were designed to the right criteria. Again, when you have those tornadic winds, you're gonna have damage to infrastructure. Um, while some of the photos you see, they're just lines and lines of those towers down, they did not all cascade down, right? So the damage was limited to the directly impacted area. They're designed not to allow everything to fall over. I think what we learned was that some of the newer structures that we have piloted in advance of the resilience plan we filed actually survived that storm much better. So some of the distribution poles in the Bridgeland area that we piloted that are made out of composite material were standing upright right next feet away from wooden structures that we're replacing them with that had snapped in half. Right, so again, validating that we are putting the right kind of resilient infrastructure in place to avoid damage to more traditional infrastructure.
And this is another viewer, KPRC2 viewer, Be Happy, and I'm happy you asked this question. They said, how did you get the extensive damage repaired so quickly? Because I'd be lying if I would say I wasn't surprised. It was incredible to see how quickly you brought, like you said, almost 1 million customers back online. How did you get all that repaired so quickly?
Right. So we have an incredibly dedicated workforce. The 2,000 men and women that worked out in the field tirelessly as soon as that storm hit. We were able to bring 5,000 men and women from neighboring utilities, some that drove an entire day, all day, all night, more than 1,000 miles to come and help. It takes that combined workforce to be organized and understand the mission that they're responsible for to provide power to our customers as quickly and as safely as possible. Let me touch on that safely piece because we're incredibly proud that many people came onto our system from other utilities and that our men and women worked alongside them in dangerous conditions. You've seen the pictures, right, of some of the most devastating areas. Those are dangerous conditions, working with dangerous equipment, and we had no serious injuries or fatalities. We sent everyone home every day as safe as they came to work, and that is one of our key goals. In addition to restoring power to our customers as quickly as possible, we want to do it as safely as possible. I'm incredibly proud that we were able to restore that many customers that quickly and that safely.
And looking at those transmission towers again, KPRC2 viewer Z-A-W asked, what maintenance do those transmission towers get? Is it a yearly thing, a monthly thing? How are they maintained?
Sure, there are periodic inspections of all of our equipment. So not only those transmission towers, but other distribution poles, the smaller poles that go to our homes and businesses, the substations. Post Winter Storm Uri, the state put in additional weatherization requirements and inspection requirements for all of that infrastructure. So we follow those schedules and have our own robust inspection process for the poles and wires as well. So all of that was up to speed. All of that was done. When you have these significant wind events, right, in excess of 110 mile an hour straight line winds with tornadoes, you're going to have damage to the infrastructure, no matter how much you inspect it and are prepared for it, right? You're going to have that damage. I think the important thing as we move forward and take lessons from this storm is figure out how to take that punch and get back up quicker, right? We know we're going to take those punches. We know we're going to have damage to our infrastructure. If you want to avoid the costs of restoration being what they're going to be from this storm, just like you had costs of restoration from Hurricane Ike, we have to make those investments in more resilient infrastructure to avoid those costly repair jobs.
So I see this picture behind you here, the one of the tower, the cross members and whatnot.
That's right.
Those, one that looked like that came down by 290 and it was replaced by a monopole. Mm-hmm. Is that the new way to go, or is that one of those temporary ordeals?
So we do have some temporary structures out there right now. But we do have a mix of those kinds of lattice towers and the monopoles. And part of what decides which one is built is engineering, but also approval of the project when we go to the state PUC for approval. Those monopoles do have different costs than the lattice towers that we're familiar with, but they do have a smaller footprint as well, right? So it is a trade-off, and so we propose approval of monopoles when we think it makes sense. When other people think it makes sense, they propose them in these public proceedings as well. So we do have a mixture of those two, and try to use them where one or the other makes the most sense. If you look out in that same area, you'll see both types of structures out there.
So those ones right by the highway there, are those permanent or are those temporary?
I believe the ones you're talking about are temporary. If they're new since the storm, we have only put up temporary transmission infrastructure, even though it looks very permanent. It is temporary in the sense that it is off the line of where the old transmission towers used to be. We have to have it in the right place, so we will need to go back and rebuild that infrastructure in the right place where we have land rights and where it's the approved path. And so that's what I mean by we need to build more permanent structures. The temporary structures are very durable.
Gotcha. And we touched on it earlier. I want to circle back around to it. Everybody was asking, myself included, why don't we just bury these power lines? Probably a lot easier said than done, huh?
It's easier said than done, but it's not something that we are opposed to, right? So in the resilience plan I mentioned earlier, we have proposed greater utilization of undergrounding, especially for public safety purposes. And most people don't know because you can't see it, but about half of our distribution system is underground already. We run and maintain every day enough distribution lines that would go around the world and around the world more than 2 times. And so there is more than half of that that's already underground. We only see the other part that is on poles in our neighborhoods and on our streets. So we will, as it makes sense, continue to underground the infrastructure in certain areas of town. But we do have to get approval from the state to be able to do materially more undergrounding than we're doing already. That's why we asked for approval of some more of that in our resilience plan filed a couple months ago.
And the outage map
Yes.
on the website, that was a big thing. Everybody wanted to look at that. They wanted to see it. Went down.
That's right.
Where are we at with the outage map? How did it fail?
Yep.
And do you feel like it failed the customers?
Yeah, we know we didn't meet customer expectations when that wasn't available when they needed it most. And that's not acceptable to us or to our customers. We understand that. There was a tremendous amount of traffic on that website, more than it was designed for, and it failed. And we're working on a replacement project that will have a new and improved outage tracker that will not have that same failure. In the meantime, we've been encouraging our customers to sign up for Power Alert service, which is a free service to customers to get specific to their premise, specific to their home or business, the outage information in real time. So when your power goes out, you would get a text or an email or a phone call, whatever your preference, notifying you that we know you're out, with an estimated restoration time and other helpful information as the event unfolds. So we encourage our customers to sign up for that more direct way of getting information about their home or business. And by the way, you can have your loved ones include you on power alerts for their home if they want to give you that insight, right? If you have an older parent and you want to know when their power is out, your parent could add you to their own power alert service, and you could get texts and emails about when your parent's power is out. So we know we need to get the outage tracker back up and running. We know it can't fail when our customers rely on it the most. And by the way, not only our customers rely on it, other public safety officials rely on it so that they have situational awareness of what's going on. So we understand the importance, and that's why we are working to make sure that it comes back in a way that will not have that failure in the future.
And I know you're still in the restoration phase, which is kind of hard for even myself to think about, that you're still trying to get things back online. But looking back at where we are now, almost a month down the line, if you could give yourself a report card grading, A, B, C, D, or F, how would you rate CenterPoint's response to this storm?
I think the men and women in the field that restored customers quickly and safely deserve the highest score, right? They went into dangerous situations with no notice, got everything done in record time if you look at our peer utilities and look at our past performance even. From a communications perspective, because of the outage tracker issues, we don't have the highest score there. And we know that. We know we missed customer expectations there, and we will use this opportunity to get better. As hurricane season is now upon us, we know that we have to be better at communicating with customers, especially when you have more advance notice like you would with a hurricane. So we know that we didn't get the top score there. I think one thing that maybe isn't obvious to everyone is that every employee at our company had some kind of role in restoration. So it's not just the men and women in the field. It is literally everyone has an emergency operations role, and they drop their day-to-day work, whether they are in accounting or in the legal department, right? You might be checking in crews at a hotel. You might be a spokesperson for a crew so that when our neighbors come out and want to talk about, what's going on, how long is this going to take, those crew spokespersons are able to engage with members of the public while our crews go and do their work. And so I also think that all of those office personnel get top grade as well, right? For dropping everything to go ensure that the men and women in the field can effectively and safely do their job.
In hurricane season, you touched on it. That was my next topic here. It's here. We are in hurricane season.
That's right.
Did this storm help us get ready for hurricane season, or did this hurt us to where we might be open to some more damage if we were to get the one this year?
Sure. So I think it helped in a couple different ways. Number one, it helped us make sure that we know where we need to get better in our storm response, whether it's communications-wise or coordination out in the field, coordination with all of those mutual assistance crews that come from other utilities. It is always helpful to exercise that muscle. We never want these events to happen. But when they do happen, we will learn from them, right? And so in advance of hurricane season, we are taking those learnings, figuring out the things that worked well, the things that we need to work on. Where it does present challenges that we are working to overcome is we obviously used a lot of material that we have on hand if a hurricane were to hit, additional poles, for example. So we are working with our suppliers to replenish our supply. We stood up 9 staging sites for our mutual assistance crews all over town where we brought in those 5,000 men and women every day, fed them, took them to hotels, gave them equipment. All of that emergency supply needs to be replenished, but we are on top of it. We started working on it as soon as the storm hit so that there wasn't a gap where we were unprepared. So we continue to work on getting ready again, given that hurricane season just started.
If you get hit by a storm this year, are you confident you'll be able to respond as if this never happened?
That's right. So some of the equipment that is still damaged that we're still working on repairing needs to be repaired, because if a pole's still leaning like this, even though it might be even more damaged with less wind, right? So I'm not going to say there's no impact remaining from the May 16th storm, but we are still laser focused on completing that work in advance of another storm coming through that could have the opportunity to damage that equipment again. Some of what we're doing as we repair those wooden distribution poles is putting in the composite poles as a replacement, right? I told you that we saw firsthand that those composite poles perform better. We've got some composite poles in stock. We are putting those in place of those wooden poles. So we're building back a more resilient grid as we do these repairs as well. And that will help the next time a storm hits.
And we keep hearing that word resiliency.
That's right.
We want to build back more resilient.
That's right.
What does that mean, and how is this plan going to help CenterPoint and Houstonians get back up online quicker if something like this were to happen again?
That's right. And we're incredibly proud of it. We were the first utility in this state to file a resilience plan under legislation that was passed last year. And it addresses risks of all kind. Obviously, we know we have hurricane risk. We know we have flooding risk. But there's also cyber security risk. There's physical security risk. Our plan addresses all of those things comprehensively and makes proposals to mitigate each one of those risks. Because I don't know if a hurricane is going to be our next risk, if a physical security issue is going to be our next risk, if a flood is going to be our next risk. We need to address them all. At the same time, we have to keep affordability in mind. So we can't go out and replace everything all at once and hit our customers' bills all at once. So it is going to take some time, but we've proposed to get off go on a number of these important resilience measures under the law that was passed last legislative session. And I do believe that assuming that gets approved, you will start to see more activity out in the field. You'll be able to see these more resilient poles in place. You'll be able to see some of the flood mitigation controls that we're taking at our substations. And that, I think, will give people confidence that they can see what it is that they're paying for. They can see the better resilience before a storm, and they'll be able to see the better resilience after a storm as well.
What's the timeline and the budget on this?
So the plan we filed covers the first 3 years, and many of these programs will take up to a decade or even more for some of them. Some of them are very short term projects, right? So our total plan, if it's approved, will be about $3 a month on the customer bill, on a residential customer bill. If you don't make those investments and you have these big storms that occur and you have significant restoration costs because the infrastructure, you haven't made that investment in more resilient infrastructure, those costs could be well in excess of $3 a month on customer bills, right? So our plan included a cost-benefit analysis done by a third party so that all the stakeholders in that process can poke at it, make sure they understand the assumptions that we used. All of the programs that we proposed are more beneficial than costly. If you take into account the restoration costs, the costs of not having electricity, right? The value of the economy in the greater Houston area is almost $2 billion a day. We know that when you don't have power, the economy comes to a grinding halt, right? And so the cost of even 1 or 2 extra days of restoration is costly. And so just to put that $3 a month cost into perspective, it is more beneficial than the cost of restoration over not only the storm that we just had, but the storms we'll have over the next 10 years. That will be more costly than the $3 cost for these programs.
And it costs me at home about $3 a month. What is the total price tag?
So the total price tag of the first 3 years is a little over $2 billion in total. And it's a range. It goes as high as $2.7 billion if you want to accelerate some of these programs. The nice thing about this infrastructure that we're replacing the older infrastructure with is that the life of that new infrastructure is very long. So the new poles, for example, that we're replacing the wooden poles with have about an 80-year life. And so we'd recover the cost of that pole over the life of that pole. So while the top line number may seem large, the monthly cost of that is mitigated by the fact that it's a long life asset that you're collecting the costs over.
Gotcha. And the approximately $100 million tab, if you will, for the May 16th storm, ballpark here. how much would that cost me on my monthly bill if it were to be approved by the PUC?
Sure. So we know it's going to be at least $100 million. So I want to make sure it's clear that there's a range. And since we're not done, we don't have the upper end of that range. If you go back to what it costs for Hurricane Ike, maybe is a good proxy for understanding that. That was about $700 million of costs that were incurred there. It equated to about $1.50 a month. We will be substantially less than that, obviously, right? So you could think about it as something less than $1 a month, around $1 a month, when all is said and done. But that's going to depend on the final cost estimate that we don't have yet and how the PUC wants us to recover those costs and over what period of time, right? But I think that's a good order of magnitude that customers can expect.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to add in there that I didn't ask, or anything we touched on that you want to expand on anymore?
I think, again, just in closing, want to thank our customers for their patience and understanding as we dealt with this storm with no notice. I personally experienced entire communities coming together, buying ice cream for the men and women out in the field because it was hot, right? We know our customers were hot when they didn't have power. Our employees and contractors and mutual assistance crews were out there working in those same conditions that everybody was in, cutting down their trees that were in their yard and on their cars and on their house. But having that kind of a response from our customers, bringing water to our crews, bringing snacks to our crews, saying thank you, greeting them with a smile, understanding that these are the worst conditions that anybody could think that they were going to face. Because again, just like we had no notice of it, our communities had no notice of it, and all of a sudden, devastating impacts, right? The fact that we can come together as individuals and help each other through it makes all the difference. And we know that while we still need to finish restoration of the poles and wires that we operate to serve our customers, we know that's not the end of restoration. Our communities still need to be restored. We were proud to be one of the founding sponsors of the Derecho fund that was put together in the immediate aftermath to help communities recover, help people pay for repair to their homes so that they can get back to normal again. So that kind of investment in our communities, we understand, is just as important as the physical restoration of our system. Our communities still need to be restored. So we look forward to continuing to make investments in that regard too.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Thanks for your time.